For me, I think my story begins with dancing. I've danced since I was about 10 years old, and it was through a school, and I was always very choreographed. And dancing for me was something I just absolutely loved. It's where my heart felt like it was opening up, where I could connect with people through movement, through my body. And it was just a completely joyous space. As we're about to start this session, Embodiments of Crisis, I'd like us to just pause and connect with our bodies. You can do this with me, or you can watch and do this later. It's up to you, but I invite you to connect with your body as we go into the session. So stand with your feet together, like so, and turn out your feet, and now turn out your heels. So now you're standing parallel. Your feet are hip distance apart. From there, we're going to slowly bend. And as you bend, try not let your ankles or your feet collapse. So keep pushing your knees back, push your ankles back, and bend. So it's like a straight line all the way down. In this position, slowly lean to the one side and hold. And to the other side. And hold. One more time, either side. Waking up the body, saying hello to the body. And gently, if you can, the rotations. And back. Other direction. Keep those knees bent and relaxed. One more time. Another direction. And gently stand up. Clasp your hands. Stretch them out. Take it to the one side. And back. To the other side. Back. And now down in front of you and hunch your back. Feel that stretch in your shoulder blades. And now clasp your hands behind your back and stretch your chest to the ceiling. And gently hands to the side as you swing your head side to side. Gentle rotations. And now to the back. Half circles. And now gently for 8 counts, you curl down to the floor, starting with your head. And 1, 2, 3. Relax the body. 4. Bend your knees. 5, 6, 7, 8. And slowly curl up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And give your body a nice shake. Thank you. That's just a little gentle exercise you can do for yourself whenever you want to, whenever you'd like to connect with yourself, to warm up the body, something that I always enjoy doing every day. In 2019, for whatever reason, gender-based violence in South Africa, where I live, had escalated. Violence in this country, unfortunately, has always been horrific. But in 2019, I found it affected me like something has never affected me before, in the sense that I felt in my body that I needed to do something with it to express how I felt. And so I decided to create a performance about what I was feeling and thinking and trying to process, of being terrified of being a woman in this country. I found myself just being so angry and so scared. And so I created this performance where I had conversations with women and I asked them just their general experiences in terms of navigating space as a woman in Cape Town, the city where I live. And I was recording those conversations. After I'd recorded all the conversations, I pieced them together into a soundtrack where, from an hour-long interview, I pulled out something very specific or powerful that they said that really resonated with me or captured me or just made me feel something. And I put all these short clips together into a soundtrack, which ended up being, I think, about 20 minutes, including my own experience of what I also experienced, where my dancing teacher was murdered. And I went about then asking a friend who was a creative and who was an artist to design some kind of imagery that could play while this audio was playing. And we spoke about blood and the visual texture and movements of what blood can look like, but also discussed how can we make it more creative and not too in someone's face. And while that imagery was going on and the soundtrack was playing, I then was going to do a very slow movement piece to that would lead towards an actual dance piece.
She inspired me from such a young age, helped me feel more confident, more independent, made me fall in love with dancing.
I approached other women who were creatives or dancers and asked them if they'd want to be part of this performance, which I called Rise, based on Maya Angelou's poem, Still I'll Rise, because I felt that us as creatives, as women, we had a platform through our bodies, through our voices, to tell our story and express how we felt. And so we found a street corner in a suburb called Muizenberg, and we each had a part of the street that was our space. And as one person finished performing, she'd walk to the next person, and then that person would start performing. So it was almost like a passing the baton of movement. And we decided specifically on a street because the street for so many women is unsafe. You're either changing your route, you're very aware of who's in that street with you. For so many people, it is just moving from A to B. But I think for so many women, it's dangerous. And so we wanted to basically reclaim the street as a space. That was my first activist performance, where I realized that what we were doing that night was provocative, was thought-provoking, was hopefully going to make people feel something and reflect. And at the end of that performance, we all felt so strong. And it was the first time realizing how powerful movements could be, that here I was feeling so scared and terrified of being a woman, and I could create a performance, collaborate with others to shift those feelings through the body and share it with other people and invite them into my thoughts and feelings. That was towards the end of 2019. I think it was around in March 2020, where I was walking in the street where I live with my friend. We just come back from a restaurant, and the restaurant is it's a 2-minute walk from where I live. And two men approached us. And while the one man was searching for my phone, the other one pointed a gun at me. I've never experienced anything like that before. And to be in that moment of looking past the barrel of the gun into this man's eyes and just repeating, I don't have anything. And he made some kind of sound with the gun. And I just repeated, I don't have anything. And then he said, fine, you can run. And me and my friend ran to the security of my building. It was incredibly traumatic. And I was quite an emotional wreck after that incident. But the next day I had my master's class that I was supposed to attend in person. And I remember thinking, am I going to stay at home and just cry, or should I go to this class and process how I feel through movement? And thankfully, the class was a safe space with people who I felt comfortable with. And so I went into class and I shared what had happened and asked if I could do a movement session with the class, and invited them to move with me because I said movement helps me process how I feel. Instead of locking it up in my body, it literally can move through my body. And went about basically doing a couple of exercises with them, also doing some mirroring, improv kind of movement work. And at the end of the session, the feedback was so powerful for me because one person said that her biggest takeaway was seeing the difference in my transformation. Because at the beginning of the session, I was sitting there hunched, very emotional, my voice was shaking. But by the end of those 45 minutes, I was sitting with my back up straight. I was laughing. I was speaking very clearly. And that, for me, was such a clear example of what moving through trauma, moving through pain can physically do for you, the benefits. And I think it is interesting that it did come after that 2019 experience of now understanding more and more what helps me during trauma and crisis, and understanding how my body is such a ready and accessible tool that I can use to process pain. And so then after that, the pandemic came about and we were all confined to our spaces. And I found myself quite restless and frustrated that I couldn't go out anymore and I lived by myself. And so I actually started just freestyling in my flat, which I never used to do before, and recording those freestyles. And for me, it was a way sort of to document what my body was experiencing during COVID-19, of the isolation, of not having any human contact, of not knowing what the future would bring, of feeling so isolated and alone. But now, through moving, depending on my mood that day, then recording it and then sharing it on my Instagram, it created some kind of connection. And it's something that I still continue up until today, of freestyling in my space, sharing that with others. So it's become a habit that I'm trying more and more to practice consciously, where I'm not just using my body as a tool to deal with trauma or crisis when something happens, but to consistently be tapping into my body as a tool to process every day. It doesn't have to be a big trauma. It literally just can be touching base in a day to see how I feel through freestyle movements. It's beautiful. And I can feel the difference it has made to my life. We're so fortunate to be here, and it's such an opportunity to connect with your being. Thank you for listening to this session and watching, and I hope you'll be able to gain something from this. Thank you.
So Diana, I don't know if our viewers in the future will understand this, but we're making this very quickly together and by making videos. And I just had the opportunity to see your video. And I wanted to let you know that the thing that was most moving for me was that the background window, I had never seen where you lived other than your apartment. So we have been communicating and doing with stories now for months and months and months. Like I would see you with the background of your apartment, and for the dance, you flipped it. And I suddenly saw South Africa. And although I knew you were there, it had never dawned on me the sort of the realness of your place, the specificity of where you are, the beauty of it. And it's so different from where I am. And I just wanted to tell you that that was really moving and important to me as someone who's only known you on Zoom, that I don't really know where you're from, just this idea of South Africa. But in any case, so thank you for sharing that with all of us.
Yeah.
And I have to say one more thing about your video, Diana. I didn't know that your teacher had been murdered. I just learned that in your video. I knew some of your other stories about what had inspired your dance activism, what had happened to you with a gun at gunpoint. And one of the things that has been really moving for me about doing things with stories, in that it's so international, is the level of violence for my African colleagues in this interaction is so extraordinary. It's so much more severe than I encounter in New York City. I need to acknowledge that difference, that it is more extreme where you live, and also acknowledge my ability to understand from afar and through fears and hard things that have happened to me, even if they aren't as extreme. And that's very complicated, but I wanted to acknowledge how sad I was that your teacher was killed. That's just awful.
I think that actually leads into the next session when we through hearing people's stories, you feel sympathy, but you also feel deep empathy. I think whether you have like a firsthand experience of hearing someone's experience, you feel it quite deeply because we're all still so connected.
In session 2 of Reframing the Crisis, we want to show the possibilities of looking at multiple stories within any trouble. And some of these stories come from people who are unlike us, like you, in the sense that you live in South Africa. You come from a completely different place in the world where I've never been. And some of the stories come from ourselves or people like us in our own communities.
And I think to build on to what you're saying, Alex, that if stories come from far away, spatially or culturally, we do not always see them easily. And even when we are close to them, they can be invisible, hidden, or repressed. And I'm aware you've led on some really interesting projects around AIDS and COVID. And I'm curious if you could please tell us a little bit more about the multiple perspectives you've had to navigate.
I'm happy to share that with you and with our viewers. And this is our next session, which is on multiple perspectives of crisis.